Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wolf Pit with another episode of Eating on a Budget. As we all continue to go broke at the gas pumps, spending twice as much money for food as we used to, and now the government's warning us about food shortages. What's next? I hate to ask that question, but it's scary. So today's video is an eating on a budget video that most people should be able to make no matter how hard times get. Oh, did I mention this meal is nutritious and very delicious? Well, it is. So let's get started. For today's recipe, I'm using a crock pot, but you don't need a crock pot for this recipe. You can do it in a pot on your stovetop or in your oven. So to the crock pot, add 1 large onion. Today I'm using a red onion, but you can use any kind of onion you have on hand. A heaping tablespoon of fresh, homegrown, store-bought minced garlic, right out of the jar. Just because a recipe calls for something or doesn't call for something doesn't mean you can't omit it, change it, or add it in. Change up the recipe to suit your taste and use what you have on hand. Don't go to the store just to buy an ingredient in a recipe, unless of course it's the main ingredient. So if you don't have fresh garlic or onions, you can use onion powder or garlic powder. Now add 2 stalks of chopped up celery, followed by 2 very large carrots, a 15-ounce can of chopped tomatoes with green chilies, 1 quart of chicken broth, and if you don't have chicken broth, you can use beef broth or vegetable broth or bouillon cubes. Or if you're really in a pinch, just use water. And then add 2 cups of water. And then add 1 pound of dried black beans that have been thoroughly rinsed and drained. And now for the seasonings, and this is where you gotta be really creative, especially if there's a seasoning that you don't like or you don't have on hand. Spices are expensive, and when you're eating on a budget, you don't have the extra fundage to buy spices. So look around in your pantry and your fridge to see what you have that you can add flavor with. Even if the spices are for something else, give them a try. Those little packs of seasonings for tacos, beef stew, gravy, pot roast, chili, meatloaf, etc. all have flavor. Just because they say they're made from meatloaf or spaghetti doesn't mean that's all you can use them for. And it's a good bang for your buck at right around 50 cents each. So for the seasonings, I added chili powder, cumin, oregano, and black pepper. Then we give it a real good mix, covered, turn the crock pot on high, and let it do its thing. Now I'm sure you've noticed I haven't added any meat to this, and I'm not going to. But you, the people, can if you like. This would be especially good if you had some leftover meat. Here's what our soup looks like after cooking on high for 3 hours. And it was starting to smell good in the neighborhood. So we gave it a good mix, put the lid back on, and let it go for another hour and a half. As you can tell, this is going to be a pretty long cook. So if you don't want to cook it that long, you can pre-soak your beans, or you can just use canned beans. But canned beans are more expensive. And when you're cooking on a budget, every penny counts. And here's what our soup looks like after cooking for another hour and a half for a total of 4.5 hours. And everything is finally breaking down and the beans are almost tender. So we tasted for seasoning and added just a little bit of kosher salt. All the other seasonings seem to be perfect. Finally, after a total of 6 hours, our beans are tender. Now take a strainer and remove about 1/4 to 1/3 of the beans. And then add a handful of cilantro and a little spritz of lime juice. And I added just a little bit of leftover fresh onion that I had to give it that nice onion bite. Now using an immersion blender, blend up everything until it's nice and smooth. If you don't have an immersion blender, you can use a regular blender, or you can use a potato masher, but you're not going to get that nice, smooth, creamy texture that you get from a blender. Or you could just totally skip this step and leave all the beans whole, but I would certainly cut the cilantro up much finer. Once everything is blended up and pretty much smooth, add the beans back in. And then give it a good mix, and it's time to eat. And if you wanted to stretch this meal even more, you could add some rice. Or serve it over rice. But today, we're going to eat it as is, but we are going to garnish it for the purpose of the video. With a little bit of Mexican-style blended cheese, a few chopped onions, and finally, for a little bit of greenery and extra flavor, some cilantro. This is totally optional, but it does make it look pretty and it does add more flavor. Some people might argue that this is just a simple vegetarian chili, and I wouldn't disagree with you at all. But I'm guessing there was about 2 quarts of bean soup in my crock pot, which equates to 8 1-cup servings, for a total of $4.10, which equates to about 51 cents per serving, which is cheaper than a cup of coffee. This is a very nutritious, high carbohydrate, high fiber, high protein meal when the struggle is real, for under $5. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.